Could anyone go down in history as an extremely admired figure and yet have been so hated in his day? Well, that's the case with Herod the Great. Herod had been the declining king of the Romans, ruling over Judea from 37 to 4 BCE. He usurped the kingdom from Palatial and Antigonus, the last of the Hashmonaim kings, the ones who were the victors of the Hanukkah story. They had brought independence to Judea for 100 years. Palatial and Antigonus waged a fierce battle against Herod to retain his kingship, causing Herod to flee with his family towards the desert. As they raced along, Herod's mother's chariot flipped. Herod, having feared the worst, vowed that on this spot he would build himself a fortress palace. With Roman backing, Herod attained the kingship and built himself quite a number of palaces. True to his word, Herod built a palace at the place he had promised and named it fittingly Herodium. This place was not just any palace. It had been magnificent, and its remains are still visible today at the Herodium National Park. Located 15 kilometers south of Jerusalem, on top of an interestingly shaped mountain which could be seen for miles, and at the edge of the desert, this had been Herod's summer palace. It was here that he entertained his patron, Marcus Agrippa, sparing no expense with his grandeur or opulence. Being that it was on the edge of the desert, as I always ask my clips on locations in deserts, from where was the water? To live his rich, luxurious lifestyle with a pool and a bathhouse, Herod engineered an aqueduct from springs located to the west near the ancient Solomon pools. The aqueduct went to the foot of the mountain, where remains of the magnificent colonnaded pool are visible. From some distance away from the mountain, one can see how Herod had artificially reshaped it. A prominent staircase runs along the middle to the top where his fortress had been. Remains of a huge tower can be seen from this distance. At the site itself, a short climb to the top will reveal an amazing landscape, including the desert topography. At the top of the mountain are the remains of Herod's stately residence. Surrounded by two thick, separated defensive walls, this fortress was circular, with each tower facing in a different direction. The eastern tower, the largest, was 40 meters high, 20 meters higher than it is today, and with a diameter of 26 meters. Today, only the base survived. In the double-thick walls were staircases ascending 7 stories high. The towers housed royal apartments. Josephus Flavius, the first-century historian, described in his book War I, not only the sight of the inner apartments with splendor, but great wealth was laid out on the outer walls and partitions and roofs. Today, the palace grounds are accessible from a western entrance right near where Herod's living quarters were. Of course, Herod's palace wouldn't be complete without a Roman bathhouse with numerous rooms, and each room having different water temperatures. The water in the hot room was heated by pipes. The indentation of these pipes are visible along the wall. Perhaps the only surviving stone dome ceiling with an oculus is found here in the room with the tepid water, known as the tepidarium. All the rooms were decorated with frescoes or paintings on wet plaster. Slight remains of these are visible, allowing visitors to imagine how splendid the bathhouse was indeed. Herod also saw to it that his guests were entertained in style. There had been a banquet hall that could lavishly entertain 60. It had been a triclinium, or an elegant room where diners could recline. The original flooring had decorative tiles, and the walls were decorated as well. But today, these are not the remains that are viewed. After Herod's death, Jewish rebels sought refuge here before the Great Revolt of the year 70. They turned Herod's distinguished banquet room into a synagogue. Today, the remains are of the synagogue with benches along 3 sides and columns meant to hold a light roof. Right nearby was a mikveh, or a ritual bath. The water for Herod's bathhouse and the mikveh in later times was held in cisterns. Originally, there had been 4 cisterns, the water coming from the aqueduct below. Slaves would bring that water to the upper-level cisterns for use in Herod's palace. One cistern was accessible from inside the fortress. Just outside was once a beautifully colonnaded garden, each column topped with intricately designed Corinthian capitals. But perhaps the most impressive area was the entrance, located on the top of that long staircase along the mountain. There were 3 beautiful vaults and arches found just before what must have been a massive, impressive doorway. All along the walls were frescoes, much of which survived until today. It is uncertain if this entranceway was actually used for a duration of time. That was due to Herod's command to reshape the mountain just before his death. Below the fortress, Herod had built a loggia, or a VIP viewing room, built above a theater for private showings. The park's authority utilized modern technology to reconstruct the opulence that had once been. Using holograms, the unique paintings that had been especially commissioned, and the elaborate architecture come to life. So after Herod had invested so much in this fortress palace, what would be the normal thing to do? Break it down, of course. As Herod realized he would not live forever, he wanted to go out the same way he had lived, in extravagance. He had the mountain reshaped, covering the lower part of the larger tower and part of the staircase with dirt. He had the great posh VIP viewing room destroyed. Why? So he could have a massive mausoleum erected that could be seen as far away as Jerusalem. Herod wanted to be remembered eternally. A small replica of this elaborate ornate mausoleum was erected right next to the theater. Sure enough, Herod's funeral was indeed a grandiose event. Josephus Flavius described in detail all the pomp and circumstance that was to be expected. He described how the procession began in the lower area of Herodium. This detail threw off the archaeologists, particularly Ehud Netzer, who were excavating in Herodium, searching endlessly for the mausoleum. They assumed Herod was buried below. It wasn't until 2007 that they discovered the correct location. However, they didn't discover it intact, as it had been smashed along with his sarcophagus and two others as well. This must have occurred as soon as the Jewish rebels assumed control of Herodium in 66 in their fight against the Romans. As Herod had been despised by a good portion of the Jewish population, who resented his usurping the throne from the Hashmonaim, the endless murders of his opponents, and the excessive taxes, they destroyed Herod's physical memorial probably as soon as possible. They also redesigned Herodium to fit their needs. They changed the triclinium into a synagogue, made a mikvah or a ritual bath, and established a weapons manufacturing area. Most importantly, they created a subterranean connecting set of tunnels where the cisterns had been. This maze of tunnels are accessible today, and visitors can descend well into these secret concealed underground passages. The rebels held out, even after the destruction of Yerushalayim and the Second Temple by Yecheni, until the year 71, when the rebels were defeated by the Romans. Following their defeat, Herodium basically remained abandoned. But once again, in the years 132 to 135, another rebellion was staged against the Romans, known as the Bar Kokhba revolt, and once again this area was part of the fighting arena. These rebels also made changes to suit their needs. The intricate tunnel network was extended with hidden openings from which the rebels could suddenly emerge, spring on their enemy, and stage surprise attacks. They enlarged the tunnels to ensure that they were broad, with high ceilings, allowing for quick troop movements. Based on letters discovered, Herodium had served as an administrative and military center. Ultimately, this rebellion was crushed, and once again Herodium was deserted. In due course of time, Herodium was resettled during the Byzantine era. Remains of a church are seen above near the remains of the synagogue. Ruins of a village and a monastery from that time period are found as well in the lower Herodium. So, Herod's ego led to a dream of immortality, having him reshape a whole mountain and erect a monumental mausoleum to be viewed for eternity. But he didn't foresee the rebels coming along to smash his dream, both physically and symbolically, in an attempt to eradicate any efforts that Herod had made. Had the rebels succeeded? Well, here we are once again 2,000 years later on Herodium discussing Herod and his accomplishments. But does he live on as Herod the Great or Herod the Great Tyrant?